Hey guys, it's Fi here, and today I'm going to be bringing you my Season 4 preview on the PvE for the Mastery changes. Now these obviously are subject to change, but I'm going to be bringing you my initial impressions and overview on all the points and whether I think they're actually viable, and if they are viable, in which cases you'll probably take them. The first thing I really want to say is that I think it's really good what Riot have done so far, because it looks like the first 9 points in each of these trees kind of defines your lane phase, whereas going deeper down into them, the 21 points down, it will actually define your mid to late game. This is really good because it means that, like for example, on a tank, you'd actually want to go 21 points into the defense tree, whereas in Season 3, you could probably get away with putting some points in defense and most into offense. Okay, so let's first look at the offense tree then, and we can see the feast is each time you kill a unit, you restore 2 health and 1 mana. Now this isn't really that good, and I really doubt I would ever take this because it's not really worth the point in my opinion. So the next one is Fury. It's 1 attack speed. It scales up to 4 as you can see here. So 4% attack speed isn't really that great because it scales off your base attack speed and not your current attack speed. So what this means is, like for example with the math of it, most champions have a 0.65 I believe attack speed, and 4% of that, if my math is correct, is something like 0.03, which is pretty much nothing. So it's kind of a waste of 4 points. The reason I say it's a waste of 4 points is because the sorcery here, you can have a up to 5% cooldown reduction. Now cooldown reduction obviously is really good, and most items that give cooldown reduction will give 10 to 20%. So 5% just from Masteries is actually pretty huge. Now the other one here on the top line is Butcher, and that's the basic attacks and single target spells deal an additional 2 damage to minions and monsters. Now this is pretty much like the Butcher in the previous Season 3 Masteries, but it's only 1 point this time, and it's going to be useful if you're playing AD and AP respectively, just so that you can pick up a couple of extra CS that you might otherwise miss. So moving on to the second line, then we have Double-Edged Sword, and this is pretty interesting. In melee you deal an additional 2% damage and receive an additional 1% damage. Range you deal and receive an additional 1.5% damage. So this means that you do more damage, but you take more damage in return, and is actually pretty good and is worth the point in my opinion. The reason behind it is because in team fights as an AP or an AD carry, you're not really looking to take damage. Your job is to avoid it while dishing out damage. So you'll be at the back, you won't take that much damage, but you will be using it more for the offensive than taking it back. Now over here, this is where the magic penetration and armor penetration was in Season 3. They've actually changed this with AD per level here. So you can see it scales up to 10 attack damage level 18, I believe. And down here we have 5 attack damage. So this now means that you don't get the penetration at the top, but you do get the flat AD, which is going to help you early, especially if you're playing an AD. 5 extra AD is pretty good and pretty strong in lane. On the other side of this, you have Mental Force, which is AP per level, and then you have the 8 ability power just flat here as well. So this is actually pretty interesting. They've changed this from penetration just to flat AD. I'm going to talk about this a little bit more when I get to the bottom of the offense tree. So spellweaving here looks really crap on the first kind of go of it, but it's actually pretty interesting. So when you damage an enemy champion with an auto attack, it increases your spell damage by 1%, stacking up to 3 times. Now this is going to be actually good for APs especially, but also ADs, because if you think about someone like Corki or Ezreal, when you do an auto attack, it's going to increase your spell damage. You're then going to use this spell damage, and you go down to this next one, which is every time you damage an enemy with a spell, it increases your basic attack damage by 1%, stacking up to 3 times. So with this first one here, you're obviously going to auto attack and increase your spell damage. You then use a spell and it increases your AD for the next basic attacks. So in combination, these two actually work pretty well, especially for AD casters in the bot lane. Now Executioner here, you do an additional damage dealt to champions below 20% health by 5%. When you put more points into this, it scales up for the percentage. So you deal now below 50%, you do an extra 5% damage. This is actually really good, especially for only being this far down in the tree. And 5% is actually a pretty big deal when you're fighting someone constantly in lane, especially if after you put your combo rotation onto them and put them below 50%, it means you just have a lot more kill potential. So let's go down to the next row then, and Dangerous Game, killing a champion restores 5% of your missing health and mana. This is pretty rubbish, and I would really doubt that I'd ever take this. The reason being is because it's kind of just a gimmicky point, and you can put points into other things here in this row, which I think is way more viable. So this here, Archmage, this is just basic spell ability power by 5%, and this is attack damage 5% as well. So when you're looking at this now, it gives you attack damage, it gives you flat attack or attack damage per level, gives you flat attack damage, and then it's going to increase all that by 5%. So when you spec the whole way down these three, they're actually going to do quite a lot of damage, and it's going to actually make quite a big difference. So same with the AP. Obviously, AP per level, flat AP, and then ability power by 5%. I've gone through this one already with the blade weaving. This frenzy here is good for AD, so critical hits increase your attack speed by 5% for 3 seconds, and this stacks up to 3 times, which means that in theory, in team fights, if you built like an Infinity Edge and a Phantom Dancer, for example, you should expect to crit more than once every 3 seconds. So you should be at the 15% cap for this mastery in every fight, and that's definitely worth a point. It's actually really good. On the other side, we can see the Arcane Blades. This is pretty much the AP version of this, and your basic attacks also deal bonus magic damage equal to 5% of your AP. This will be especially good for someone like Twisted Fate. If you imagine his pick a card with Lichbane plus this Arcane Blade, you're actually going to do an absolute ton of damage. You can also use something, maybe a point in here, for someone like Corki when you're building Trinity Force, because you do get AP. It's not going to be that much, and it's not going to be very effective. I don't think it's worth it on there, but definitely for AP champions. So this is where you get the penetration, and this is why I said I wanted to talk about it later, because it's right at the bottom of the tree, which is actually really cool. It goes up to 6% armor and magic penetration, which means that for someone like Corki and Ezreal, you get both penetration. So you get dual penetration for 3 points. You don't have to spend like points in either side going down the armor penetration and magic pen. You get them rolled into one, which is really, really cool for the offense tree, and is going to be a must-have for all people. Now, what I wanted to say, I want to talk about penetration later, because you can see you're getting like flat attack damage here. Now, I wouldn't be surprised if people are only going to go 9 into the offense tree. This means that you can only pick up the flat attack damage. You're not going to get the penetration anymore. Now, it's more common to build AD first rather than penetration in your build wise. So, for example, on a Riven, you would get a Bloodthirster or a Hydra, and then you would get maybe a Last Whisper or a Brutalizer as kind of your second, third item. So it may be more viable now to actually take a lot more armor penetration runes instead of attack damage runes, because you're not going to get the armor penetration from your masteries, and you still need armor penetration early, because people don't have much armor and magic resist early on into the game, because obviously armor magic resist scales or comes from items and levels, neither of which people have at level 1 or the lane phase even. So armor penetration is really good, and if you're not going to get it because you're only specking 9 into offense, then you'll probably want to take that in your runes. The final point in offense here is going to be Havoc, which is 3% increased damage, very standard and a good reward for going the whole way down into offense. So let's just return these points then and go into the defense tree. You can see block, it's going to increase incoming damage from champion basic attacks by 1, and when you go down into the one below this, it's going to reduce all incoming damage from champions by 2 if you're melee, and if you're ranged, it's going to increase incoming damage from champions by 1. So this is actually a pretty cool change, because if you are a tank here and you get a Doran's Shield, so someone like a Garen or a Renekton, and you're against someone like Kennen, then this is going to increase the amount of champion basic attacks you block, and then this is obviously going to increase that by even more. So you'll actually end up just blocking a ton of damage and be able to survive even better. This recovery is just 2 health per 5 seconds. It's kind of rubbish. You're probably not going to take anything into this. Health per 5 seconds is okay, but it's never that effective, and especially because there are better options in this case. So here we go, you get 5% of your bonus armor and magic resistance here. Now this is another change with the defense tree, is I'm going to go into it a bit later here, but you can see the flat armor and the flat magic resist is all the way down here, so you don't actually get this by speccing 9 into defense anymore. You're only going to get it from the bonus. Now bonus obviously isn't as effective on an AD or an AP, which probably would have specced 9 into defense for the armor, because you're not going to be building armor yourself, so the percentage of that will be lower. But it's still probably going to be worth a point if you put it down in here. Then you go to this is just a jungle mastery, so bladed armor is going to, it's very similar to what it was before, but it's now going to deal damage equal to 1% of their current health each second. So slightly better. I don't know the numbers, but it sounds like it's going to be slightly better for junglers, but you'd obviously never take this in lane. This is reduced damage taken from neutral monsters by 2, and it doesn't affect lane minions, so there's literally no reason for a laner to ever take this. I've already gone over here, but this is Veteran Scars. Now, Veteran Scars used to give you health per level, and in this time it's just going to give you flat health. 36 health is pretty good, and when you consider someone's armor, that's probably just over half of a basic attack extra that you can take as punishment, which is actually really strong in lane, especially for an AD carry. This obviously here as well, 3% of your maximum health is pretty huge and is really, really good. So For most ADs now, you will probably be speccing 21.9. And if you go, before you could go like 21.54 for the mana regen, but this time around, you're not going to pick up this 3% maximum health. And this is a really big thing for lane phase. So if someone is 21.9 and you go 21.09 into utility because you want the mana regen, you're automatically going to be at a disadvantage in lane. And I think it's actually going to be a really big deal. So I would expect to see kind of more mana potions on people, on AD carries, and I expect to see more mana management rather than specking into the utility tree, because this is so important. So the other thing as well, oppression here, this is kind of a rubbishy mastery. I don't think you're really going to take this very often, because it reduces the damage taken by 3% from enemies that have impaired movement, meaning that crowd controlled enemies will deal less damage to you. As a tank though, you're not really going to use this as much. Probably Shen, if you taunt them, then you obviously will use this, so maybe it's worth it on Shen. But in general, in team fights, a lot of the CC will be used to protect your AD, and you're not really going to be taking damage from your tanks anyway, so this probably isn't going to be a worthwhile point to take, especially considering what you can get on the rest of this line. So obviously you want the Juggernaut, but then you go here for the hardiness, you get +5 armor, and you're going to get +5 magic resist on this line as well. Now these obviously are really good for any tank, and is definitely going to be worth the points. Then going down to reinforced armor, it reduces the damage taken by critical strikes by 10%. Obviously as a tank, your job is to attack the enemy AD, and the enemy AD is going to build some crit to destroy you, so obviously this is pretty good, especially considering late game ADs will probably crit for about 1000 damage. 10% of that is going to be 100, so blocking 100 damage is actually pretty big. This over here, evasive, some people don't really like this, but I actually think it's pretty good. So it reduces all damage taken by 4% from area of effect magic damage. Now, if you think most supports will be doing AoE magic damage, most supports have AP scalings. Most mids, or pretty much every mid, I can't think of really anyone who's just single target. Most of them have an AoE spell that are probably going to hit you even if it's not aimed at you. So this is actually definitely going to be worth a point. Then we look over here at swiftness, reduce the effectiveness of snows by 10%. Now, in the previous season 3, what we're on right now, you can put 2 points into this and get it at 15%, but this time it's at 1 point and you get 10%, so it's actually more effective to get this time round, and maybe worth a point, especially considering there isn't much else on this line to really get. Now there is this here, 1% of your missing health every 5 seconds, it scales up to 3 when you put 3 points into it. This is kind of rubbish though, in my opinion. You're not really going to use this, and it's only effective in lane. And I kind of feel like it's a waste putting points just for a lane mastery when you're, one, you can buy a health potion to kind of counteract it, and that's what, 35 gold. So 35 gold for 3 points is pretty good, even though you will have to buy more potions, obviously. But going this far down, you really want to be taking things that are going to help you mid to late game. So this point here is also pretty useless, because increasing all sources of incoming healing by 10% when below 25% health, even though this is like, tanks obviously will go this far down into defense tree, so 10% of your health, 25% is a bigger pool for it to activate on. Increasing healing by 10% isn't really a lot unless you've got like a Soraka on your team, because the heal isn't going to be enough to make the 10% worth it. If you're with a Soraka and you're playing, then by all means take this. If you're just with a Sona or Nami though, I really don't think it's going to be worth it. So this Tenacious here is pretty good. You gain +4 armor and 2 magic resist for each nearby enemy champion. Now it is actually 4 points, which is pretty expensive, but by this time you should have filled everything anyway. And it's pretty good in a team fight if you think about it. If you're around all 5 of them, then 5 times 4 is going to be +20 armor, and you're also going to have +10 magic resist. So that's actually really, really effective. Definitely good use of 4 points for team fighting. Runic Shield here is something that I'm on the fence about, because I'm not sure whether it's actually that great. You start the game with an extra 50 health shield, and this shield regenerates each time you respawn. It doesn't mean when you go back to base it regens, it means you have to die. So obviously this will be good for like an early jungle clear, and if you die obviously you get that back, and in lane when you die you'll go back to lane with this extra health, so you'll actually be able to claw your way back into the lane a bit more and be able to fight the enemy with the extra 50 health. But to be honest, mid to late game, this is rubbish. It's not going to matter at all, and you don't want to die to proc a 50 health shield, so it's kind of useless. The final point here, Legendary Guardian, reduces the duration of crowd control effects by 15%. This is actually really good, especially when you combine it with Tenacity, so definitely worth and encouraging you to take 21 points into defense if you're going to be the subject of CC like a tank would be. So let's reset this again and finally move on to the utility tree. Phase Walker reduces the cast time of recall by a second. This is within the previous Season 3 as well. You got the Fleet of Foot this time. Now this has no specification. There's only out of combat, which it was in the previous season. So this will actually be good to take on junglers. Also take on like mids like Rise and Twisted Fate as well, because they're relying on the movement speed. This is where most of your points are going to go into though. Meditation, +3 mana regen per 5. And then this down here is really good as well. Strength of Spirit. So you gain health regen equal to 10% of your mana regeneration. Put that on someone like Lux, for example, who builds a Chalice and then also like a Doran's Ring. Or you put it on someone like Syndra, who will build a Doran's Ring and a Tear sometimes, even though sometimes they get Chalice. This will actually mean that you don't have to buy as many health potions. You can be a bit more aggressive in the middle lane. You don't have to worry about being bullied out, because as soon as you like obviously take Harass, you're going to be regenerating that faster. Go back up to here, Scout, increase the cast range of wards and relic items by 10%. This is pretty rubbish, and I don't think you'd ever put a point into here. There's no reason for you to retake it, and there are much better choices I've shown you already. So let's go over to here, Conjure. Summoned units and traps have a 10% increased duration. I don't think this is really going to be, again, worth it on any champions. This obviously would work on Annie Tibbers, so 10% of Annie Tibbers is pretty good, I guess. And you could make the argument for Nidalee traps, but really you don't play Nidalee for traps, so I'm pretty sure this isn't going to be worth it again. Okay, the next 3 points here is Summoner Insight. This will be something you will be taking every time if you spec into utility. This is 10% cooldown on your summoner spells, which is actually a really huge difference, and can mean the difference. Like if your opponent doesn't have this and you do have this, it's going to be a huge advantage for when you trade flashes. Okay, so looking over here, Alchemist, this is a really cool change. Now it increases the duration of your potions and elixirs by 10%. It obviously makes your elixirs way more effective, but the thing that's really cool is this next point down, so Culinary Master. Your health potions are upgraded into biscuits that restore 20 health and 10 mana instantly upon consumption. So this means that as soon as you use your potion, you suddenly get this instant burst of health and mana, which means that obviously if you're fighting, you run out of mana, you can pop this biscuit straight away and get the mana to fight. Or if you're about to die from the last tick of Ignite, you use your biscuit and you're actually going to survive it. This is really cool, I think. But the interesting thing that I really want to point out now is if you're only going to go 9 points into utility, then you have to decide between this and Greed. Now, Greed increases the duration of Shrine, Relic, Quest, and Neutral Monster buffs by 20%. So basically this means you have a longer period on your blue buff. Now this is really good. Like blue buff is really good on mid champions, obviously really good on champions like Lux, but this biscuit would also be really good on champions like Lux. So you have to make a decision whether you're going to play more aggressive. If you're going to play more aggressive, you want the Culinary Master. If you just want to farm and poke from range, then you're going to want to take your Greed. So here, Vampirism, this is kind of rubbish. 3% lifesteal and spell vamp. Lifesteal is going to be rubbish in my opinion, because like you don't do much AD damage on supports or APs, so the 3% lifesteal will be practically nothing. And spell vamp is okay, but again, 3% isn't really enough to make a difference, and it would just be kind of helping you to sustain in lane, so it's not really worth the 3 points. Now, part of that is because Runic Affinity over here, this is just the gold generation for a support, or possibly a mid laner, I guess, if you really wanted to go full utility. It's going to be 1.5 gold every 10 seconds, which is pretty good. And this wealth is really cool. So this is practically just for support. So you gain 1 gold each time an ally kills a nearby lane minion. So if your enemy, or your AD, kills 200 minions in lane and you're there for that, you're going to get an extra 200 gold. That's actually a pretty cool change, because it's kind of balanced the wealth out a little bit between your AD and support. Ambient gold is going to be different, obviously, and the fact that the support can only buy a limited number of wards in Season 4 anyway, means that he's not going to have so much focus on the wards, and it'll actually be a little bit richer just from the spreading of the ward coverage across the whole team, even though no one's really thought about that. So here, this Bandit starting gold plus 40 is really good. The Expanded Mind, this is kind of rubbish. I don't really like this either, because 5% increased maximum mana is only really good on possibly someone who uses a lot of mana like Nami, Sona, Zyra. But then again, you don't really buy mana on any of these champions, so you're not really going to increase, like the 5% isn't really going to make much of a difference on the champions. I honestly feel like you can spend these 3 points better in the tree, even by going up and getting something else up here. Now, this inspiration is really cool. So this is something I really, really like. Now, one of the problems at the moment, especially in high-level games, is teams will farm, that they're very good at not wasting minions, which means that you gain levels quicker in higher level games. And so when you come to team fight mid game, your solo laners will probably be around level 14 to 15, maybe even 16, whereas your support will probably only be like level 10 or 11. Now this level advantage means it's really easy to kill supports, and it's one of the reasons like you can see pro players aim for the support so often is because they're so underleveled and weak. Now, when you actually group as a team from now on, you're going to have this inspiration, and so it means that you won't be underleveled anymore. You'll be able to be more effective as a support, and you'll catch yourself back up as the game goes on. So going down to the next level, then we have Scavenger, and I also don't really like this trait in the utility tree either. Now, melee, it grants you an extra 15 gold on champion killer assist, which is okay, I guess, but isn't going to be game breaking. It's better on range champions where you gain a 3 gold each time you attack an enemy champion. Now, the thing about this is the way that the current meta has evolved with bot lane, you don't really auto-attack people because people are much more aggressive now. They're always constantly looking for kills. And so if you go into range for an auto-attack, you're most likely going to be fighting. Or if you're not fighting, you definitely will be after you auto-attack someone because there will be some aggression put back onto you. And so you're not really going to use this kind of pickpocketing style of mastery. So finally, let's go over to intelligence. This is another one which you will definitely be taking every time. So 5% cooldown reduction and reduces the cooldown of your activated items by 10%. Now Riot have said they want to put more gold onto support, so there's definitely going to be buying these activated items earlier, especially some of them have quite a long cooldown like the Crucible, so this will actually make quite a big difference. The other thing I want to mention is that most supports will probably be taking these 4 points over here in sorcery as well, because let me take some of this away because I can't get it in. But the 5% cooldown reduction plus the 5%, god damn, you 5% on cooldown over here means you have 10% base cooldown reduction from the start of the game. This is actually really big, and if you ever buy a cooldown reduction item like Rellenomicon, you're already hitting the territory where it starts to make a difference to your spells. Now finally, Wanderer, use 5% movement speed out of combat. This isn't too great, but it's going to help a lot better when you're running around trying to switch between lanes, because normally if they start to push a lane, your job as a support is to come over and help them. Okay guys, so thank you for watching this video, and I know it was actually pretty long for a mastery overview and impression, but I really wanted to go in depth and tell you exactly what I thought about each of these points, whether they're viable, and whether I'd actually take them myself, and what kind of you have to expect coming into Season 4. Now if you enjoyed this video, please make sure you do like and subscribe it. Go like my Facebook, follow me on Twitter, and I'll catch you in my next video.